Every automaker claims to build machines of progress, safer, faster, smarter. But history tells a cruel truth. Some of the most famous companies on Earth once sold rolling coffins. Whether through greed, ignorance, or arrogance, these cars turned highways into morgues. They weren't just unsafe, they were fundamentally flawed, engineered without conscience. What follows is a list of the most infamous cars ever built, vehicles that caused multiple deaths not by accident, but by design failure and corporate denial. These cars proved that in the wrong hands, a steering wheel could be a weapon, even against the person holding it. Dear viewer, we have set a goal of reaching 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we would love for you to join us. Thank you for your support. Number 8. In 1941, Plymouth was Chrysler Corporation's value brand, a dependable choice for the middle-class American family. The P12, part of the Special Deluxe series, was introduced as a solid, affordable sedan that prioritized comfort and simplicity over sophistication. It was built in an era when aerodynamics and safety were afterthoughts. America hadn't yet entered World War II, and automakers competed on chrome, price, and comfort, not crash performance or stability. Yet what Plymouth called sturdy and dependable would, on modern roads, be described as top-heavy, unstable, and outright dangerous. The 1941 Plymouth P12 was a body-on-frame sedan, using technology and layout that dated back a decade. Specifications: engine, 201 QN inline-6 L-head. Horsepower, 87 HP. Weight, about 3,150 pounds. Transmission, 3-speed manual. Suspension, rigid front beam axle with leaf springs. Brakes, hydraulic drum brakes. While the car appeared modern compared to pre-Depression models, its mechanical underpinnings were obsolete even by 1941. This was a car designed for slow, straight-line cruising, not for evasive maneuvers, wet pavement, or emergency stops. The P12 carried most of its mass over the front axle. The long cast-iron engine block, radiator, and heavy front body panels shifted the center of gravity dangerously forward. This imbalance led to 3 major handling flaws. Understeer. On corners or slick surfaces, the front tires lost traction first, sending the car plowing straight ahead. Weight transfer. During braking, even more mass shifted to the nose, unloading the rear tires and reducing control. Rollover tendency. If the driver tried to correct a skid suddenly, the high front-biased center of gravity could make the entire car tip and roll. During 1940s accident investigations, state police often found Plymouth sedans flipped completely over, especially on wet rural roads or during downhill turns. The front suspension of the P12 was a throwback, a solid axle on leaf springs, a design borrowed from trucks. There were no independent front wheels. The axle was one piece, meaning that if one wheel hit a bump, the entire front end reacted. This caused the tires to lose constant contact with the road, especially during cornering or braking. On slippery or uneven surfaces, the result was catastrophic: loss of control, skidding, and ultimately rollovers. Drivers of the time frequently described the Plymouth as bouncy and hard to keep straight on gravel or ice. Even in contemporary reviews, trade publications like Automotive Industries noted that Plymouth lagged behind GM's and Ford's newer independent front suspension systems, a deficiency that directly impacted safety. The P12's roof structure was made of thin steel supported by weak pillars. In rollover crashes, the A and B pillars often buckled instantly, causing the roof to flatten onto passengers. Since there were no seat belts, no roll bars, no crumple zones, passengers had no protection whatsoever. The heavy steel frame and roof acted as a giant press, crushing the car's occupants in seconds. Many crash reports described victims trapped under caved-in roofs or pinned by the steering column, unable to escape even if the car did not catch fire. The P12 used four-wheel hydraulic drum brakes, which were modern for the time, but completely unbalanced. The front drums locked easily under panic braking, causing instant skids. The rear wheels, now unloaded from weight transfer, would slide sideways, initiating a spin. Once the car spun, its tall, narrow body made it likely to roll over. At speeds over 50 miles per hour, even experienced drivers had difficulty regaining control. On rain-slicked roads, fatalities were almost guaranteed. After World War II, Plymouth marketed the P12 as a sturdy, reliable, pre-war car for returning veterans. Many bought them used, unaware of the stability hazards. However, accident data from the late 1940s shows that older Plymouths, especially the 1941 model, were overrepresented in rollover fatalities compared to their total numbers on the road. Its long life as a second-hand car meant many post-war families unknowingly drove a death trap, thinking its heavy steel body made it safe. In summary, the 1941 Plymouth P12 embodied all the pre-safety era engineering mistakes. Design element, consequence. Nose heavy weight, unstable handling, poor cornering. Solid front axle, loss of traction and bump steer. High center of gravity, frequent rollovers. Weak roof structure, passenger crushing in rollovers. No safety features, fatal injuries even in low-speed crashes. This was a car that didn't protect you, it punished you for trying to correct it. The Plymouth P12 remains a chilling reminder of what cars were like before safety science existed. It represented an era where durability was mistaken for safety, and where heavy steel was assumed to save lives, when in fact it often amplified the impact energy that passengers absorbed. Modern automotive safety standards, crumple zones, roll bars, seat belts, collapsible steering columns were decades away, but the tragedies of cars like the P12 helped pave the path toward them. The 1941 Plymouth P12 was marketed as a sturdy, reliable family car. Yet in real-world driving, it was a rolling hazard, prone to tipping, collapsing, and killing its occupants. Its lesson endures. A car's weight doesn't equal safety. Its engineering does. Number 7. In 1948, Packard was still a respected name, a symbol of old-world luxury, refinement, and class. The Super 8 sat just below the top-tier Custom 8, offering prestige to businessmen and professionals who wanted Cadillac-level comfort without flaunting excess. But beneath its beautifully sculpted body was a dangerous contradiction. It was nearly 4,500 pounds of steel moved by pre-war mechanical systems that had not evolved to match the weight or speed of post-war traffic. When Packard called it solid and substantial, it wasn't exaggerating. It was admitting a deadly truth. Specifications: engine, 327 cubic inch, 5.4 liter, straight 8. Horsepower, approximately 145 horsepower, depending on carburetor setup. Transmission, 3-speed manual or optional Ultramatic automatic, introduced soon after. Curb weight, 4,300 to 4,600 pounds. Brakes, four-wheel hydraulic drum brakes. Chassis, body-on-frame construction with coil leaf spring suspension. The Super 8 was a massive car, longer and heavier than nearly all its competitors in the late 1940s. Yet despite its luxury image, it still relied on the same braking technology as in 1935. Small, single-leading shoe drum brakes with limited heat capacity. Packard engineers focused on smoothness, not safety. The result was a car that could accelerate confidently, but couldn't stop safely. The number one killer associated with the 1948 Packard Super 8 was brake fade. When descending a long hill or driving aggressively on highways, the drum brakes overheated quickly, causing loss of hydraulic pressure due to boiling brake fluid, glazing of brake linings, reducing friction, lengthening stopping distances to well over 250 feet from 60 miles per hour. In numerous accident reports from the late 1940s and early 1950s, police investigators noted that Packard drivers had no brakes left when attempting to stop after extended downhill runs. Because the car weighed over 2 tons, once the brakes failed, momentum took over. The Packard would continue rolling uncontrollably, a 4,000-pound bullet made of chrome and steel. Drivers who lost their brakes descending mountain roads or even long rural grades often didn't live long enough to report what happened. The Packard Super 8 had a front-heavy layout, with its enormous inline-8 engine sitting well ahead of the front axle. That imbalance caused 3 major problems. Severe understeer, the car refused to turn when cornering at speed. Weight shift under braking, the nose dove dramatically, overloading the front tires and lifting the rear. Unstable recovery. If the driver corrected too sharply, the car's mass swung violently, sometimes leading to a spin or overroll. On narrow rural roads, which were common in the late 1940s, the Packard's handling characteristics were often lethal. Owners who pushed it even slightly beyond its comfort zone found themselves wrestling a mass of iron, especially when the brakes began to fade. The Super 8's braking system was typical of luxury cars before World War II. Large-diameter drum brakes without proper ventilation or finning. There were no cooling ducts, dual-circuit redundancy. A single leak meant total failure. Power assistance, until later models added vacuum boosters. In heavy cars like the Packard, this setup was suicidal under continuous braking. During 1948 road tests by Mechanics Illustrated and Popular Science, testers noted, "The Super 8 stops smoothly but requires a firm leg and fade develops after only a few hard applications." That was a polite way of saying the brakes failed under stress. The sheer kinetic energy of the 4,500-pound Super 8 traveling at 70 miles per hour was enormous, over 500,000 foot-pounds of energy that the tiny drum linings simply couldn't dissipate. At first glance, the Super 8 looked safe, big, heavy, and solid. But weight does not equal protection. Inside, the car offered a rigid steering column aimed directly at the driver's chest, a steel dashboard with protruding knobs and edges, bench seats with no belts or supports, thin roof pillars that collapsed in rollovers despite the weight of the car. In head-on collisions, the Packard's rigid frame transmitted all impact energy directly into passengers. There were no crumple zones. The structure didn't deform to absorb energy. Instead, the human body did. Many survivors of Packard wrecks suffered massive chest injuries, fractured skulls, and impalement by the steering shaft or dashboard. Packard marketed the Super 8 as the gentleman's motor car, emphasizing its quietness, smooth ride, and dignity. but by 1948, its technology was a generation out of date. While Cadillac and Oldsmobile were introducing modern innovations like overhead valve V8s and better hydraulic systems, Packard stuck with pre-war designs, prioritizing comfort over control. This stubborn conservatism had consequences. Numerous fatal accidents were reported in mountainous states like Pennsylvania and California due to brake loss. Insurers began quietly noting Packard models as high risk on steep grades. By the early 1950s, Packard's reputation for engineering excellence began to crumble, along with its sales. Design element. Consequence. Nearly 4,500 pounds of weight. Overwhelmed braking system. Outdated drum brakes. Rapid overheating and fade. Front-heavy design. Poor cornering and stability. Rigid chassis and steering. Fatal injuries in frontal impacts. No redundancy or ventilation. Total brake failure under stress. The 1948 Super 8 could cruise comfortably until it had to stop. Then physics and poor design took over, often fatally. The Packard Super 8 was a masterclass in comfort and a nightmare in control. It proved that luxury without engineering balance can be fatal. It's a haunting reminder that the greatest threat behind the wheel isn't recklessness, it's misplaced trust in a car that looks strong but isn't safe.
Number 6. The 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme was GM's answer to the growing market for mid-size personal luxury cars. It offered a plush interior, a smooth ride, and styling cues that made it look sleek and sophisticated. At first glance, it seemed perfect for middle-class families and suburban professionals, but beneath its designer veneer lurked a recipe for disaster. Specifications. Engine, 350 cubic inches or 5.7-liter V8, producing 170 to 200 horsepower. Transmission, 3-speed manual or TH350 automatic. Curb weight, approximately 4,000 pounds. Suspension, soft coil springs with front independent suspension and rear leaf springs. Brakes, front discs, rear drums. Key engineering traits. The floaty suspension prioritized comfort over road grip. The weight distribution favored the front end, increasing understeer and reducing traction at the rear. Drum brakes in the rear limited stopping power, especially in emergency situations. Together, these features made the Cutlass Supreme a heavy car that didn't respond well when drivers pushed it hard or faced slick conditions. One of the Cutlass Supreme's biggest dangers was its behavior on wet roads. Soft suspension caused excessive body roll. Long wheelbase and wide stance helped straight-line comfort but reduced agility. Front heavy weight increased the risk of understeer, making the car resist turning during evasive maneuvers. In heavy rain, these factors combined to lift the tires off the road, hydroplaning, leaving drivers with no steering or braking control. At 50 to 60 miles per hour, a hydroplaning Cutlass could spin violently, often crossing lanes or sliding into oncoming traffic. The Cutlass Supreme's braking system also contributed to its dangerous reputation. Rear drum brakes overheated quickly under repeated use, such as on highways or during emergency stops. Brake fade could leave drivers with virtually no stopping power in critical moments. Combined with the car's weight, stopping distances were dangerously long, sometimes exceeding 200 feet from 60 miles per hour on wet pavement. In accidents, investigators frequently noted that drivers had little chance to avoid collisions once hydroplaning began. Statistics and anecdotal reports from the mid-1970s highlight the Cutlass Supreme's safety issues. Spinouts on wet roads were common, especially for inexperienced drivers or those in emergency lane change maneuvers. Head-on collisions often resulted when the car crossed the center line after hydroplaning. The heavy body amplified the impact forces, making collisions far more lethal for all parties involved. In urban areas, the Cutlass's tendency to float at higher speeds contributed to accidents with parked cars, trees, and pedestrians. Investigators called the Cutlass a very comfortable coffin on slick roads, reflecting both its luxury and its danger. Compared to other mid-size personal luxury cars of the era, car, curb weight, suspension, braking, wet road performance. Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, 4,000 pounds, soft coil, leaf, rear drums, hydroplane prone. Buick Century, 3,800 pounds, slightly stiffer, rear drums, more controllable. Pontiac Grand Prix, 3,900 pounds, firmer, rear drums, slightly better handling. Ford Torino, 4,100 pounds, floaty, rear drums, similar issues. The Cutlass Supreme's combination of heavy weight, soft suspension, and rear drum brakes made it one of the more dangerous mid-size luxury cars on wet roads. The 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme exemplifies the 1970s American philosophy of mid-size luxury: smooth, quiet, comfortable, and heavy. Yet this pursuit of comfort came at the expense of braking effectiveness, steering precision, and wet weather stability. For everyday drivers, especially on rainy highways, the Cutlass Supreme could turn a routine commute into a fatal event. The 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme is a stark reminder that luxury and safety don't automatically coexist. Its elegant styling and cushioned ride concealed a dangerous truth. Without proper engineering for handling and braking, even a mid-size car could become a spinning death trap. Number 5. The Plymouth Duster was Chrysler's attempt at a compact, sporty coupe that appealed to young drivers in the mid-1970s. Marketed as affordable performance, it was lighter and more nimble than full-size muscle cars. Offered engine choices from a 198 CID Slant 6 to a 340 CID V8, giving buyers options for speed on a budget. At first glance, it promised thrills and style at an entry-level price, but beneath the sheet metal lay a series of engineering compromises that made it hazardous. Specifications: curb weight, approximately 2,400 to 2,600 pounds. Suspension: torsion bars in front, leaf springs in rear. Brakes: front discs on some models, rear drums. Power: 198 to 340 CID engines, up to 275 HP. Key engineering traits: rear drum brakes could not dissipate heat well, leading to brake fade during repeated stops. The car's short wheelbase and light rear end made it prone to oversteer and fishtailing. Crumple zones were minimal, and fuel tank placement near the rear axle made the car susceptible to post-collision fires. The Duster's rear suspension and weight distribution created a recipe for instability. Rear heavy at speed, particularly with a full gas tank or a V8 installed. Leaf spring rear suspension, inexpensive but unforgiving, could snap under aggressive cornering or sudden maneuvers. Result: fishtailing at high speeds, especially on wet or uneven surfaces. Young drivers, who were the primary audience, often underestimated this trait, leading to loss of control accidents. Even with front disc brakes, the Duster's braking system had flaws. Rear drum brakes overheated quickly, reducing stopping power. Heavy braking in emergency situations often caused the rear to lock, worsening oversteer. On highways, stopping distances were long, particularly for high-powered V8 models. Combined with a lightweight rear end, these flaws made high-speed emergencies deadly. Another major hazard was the location and protection of the fuel tank. Rear-mounted fuel tanks were vulnerable in collisions, especially rear-end impacts. Reports of ruptured tanks leading to fires were common in 1970s Duster accidents. The combination of rear-end crashes plus fishtailing plus drum brakes made fires a grimly predictable outcome. Accident patterns highlighted the Duster's dangers. Fishtailing spinouts caused cars to cross lanes and hit oncoming traffic. Rear-end collisions often ruptured the gas tank, leading to fires that trapped occupants. Many young drivers died because enthusiasm for speed exceeded the car's handling limits. Investigators of the era frequently noted that the Duster was a car that demanded respect its drivers often didn't have. Car, weight, rear suspension, brakes, wet road behavior. Plymouth Duster, 2,400 to 2,600 pounds. Leaf springs, rear drums, fishtail prone. AMC Hornet, 2,500 to 2,700 pounds. Coil rear, rear drums, slightly more stable. Ford Maverick, 2,500 to 2,700 pounds. Leaf rear, rear drums, oversteer less severe. Chevrolet Nova, 2,600 pounds. Leaf rear, rear drums, similar fishtailing issues. The Duster's combination of lightweight, rear-heavy dynamics and outdated brakes put it among the more dangerous compact cars of its era. The Plymouth Duster represents a classic 1970s compact muscle paradox. Affordable and stylish, it offered youthful thrills. But engineering compromises, safety ignored for performance and cost, made it a frequent participant in fatal accidents. In short, the Duster looked fast and fun, but handled like a loaded dice, thrilling until it killed. The 1975 Plymouth Duster is a reminder that lightweight speed without safety engineering is a deadly combination. Its charm for young drivers came with a dark price: poor stability, weak brakes, and a rear end that turned minor accidents into fatal tragedies.
Number 4. The Mercury Monarch debuted in the mid-1970s as a mid-size, comfortable sedan aimed at families and professionals. Positioned between the compact Ford Maverick and the full-size Ford LTD, it promised quiet refinement and ample interior space. Engines ranged from modest inline sixes to V8s, providing moderate performance for suburban drivers. At first glance, it seemed safe, conventional, and practical. But beneath the surface, it carried inherited hazards from smaller, less protected models. The Mercury Monarch shared many components with the Ford Pinto, particularly in its rear suspension and fuel system design. Rear suspension, lightweight leaf springs, optimized for comfort over stability. Fuel tank placement, positioned directly behind the rear axle, just ahead of the bumper. Body structure, mid-size steel unibody with minimal crumple zones. These choices made the car comfortable and cheap to produce, but inherently dangerous in collisions, especially rear-end impacts. The Mercury Monarch's Penco-derived rear fuel tank was the source of its deadliest flaw. Rear-end collisions at even moderate speeds could rupture the tank. Exposed filler necks and minimal protective shielding allowed fuel to leak onto hot exhaust components, causing instant fires. Occupants trapped in rear-seated positions often had no time to escape. This issue was widely documented in insurance and safety reports during the 1970s and early 1980s. Though not a sports car, the Monarch's rear suspension contributed to loss-of-control scenarios. Light, flexible rear leaf springs allowed the rear to swing out during sudden braking or evasive maneuvers. Rear heavy weight distribution when loaded made spinouts and jackknifing possible in high-speed traffic. Combined with basic drum brakes, stopping distances were long, leaving little margin for driver error.
The Mercury Monarch's combination of inherited Pinto flaws and mid-sized dynamics led to numerous deadly accidents. Rear-end crashes often resulted in fuel-fed fires. Spinouts, minor evasive maneuvers could produce rollovers or side impact collisions. Investigators noted that the Monarch looked ordinary but carried extraordinary risk due to its design lineage. Car, weight, rear fuel tank, crash behavior, outcome. Mercury Monarch, 3,000 to 3,200 lbs. Pinto-derived. Rear rupture and fire. Deadly in rear impacts. Ford Maverick, 2,500 to 2,700 lbs. Similar but smaller. Rear rupture and spinouts. Frequent fatalities. Ford Pinto, 2,000 to 2,300 lbs. Original. Rear fire and explosion. Highly publicized deaths. Chevrolet Nova, 2,600 to 2,700 lbs. Rear-mounted but better shielding. Rear collision damage. Safer by comparison. The Mercury Monarch is a case study on how platform inheritance can carry risk. Designers prioritized cost and comfort over structural safety. Rear-end collisions transformed ordinary traffic incidents into fatal fires. Its mid-size, family-oriented image masked an underlying reality inherited from a notorious compact. The 1975 Mercury Monarch reminds us that a car's pedigree matters as much as its curb weight or interior luxury. Borrowing Pinto components may have simplified production, but it passed lethal flaws onto a bigger, seemingly safer vehicle. For drivers and families, the lesson was stark. Not all mid-size sedans were truly safe, no matter their size or appearance. Number 3. By 1975, the Chevrolet Camaro was firmly established as one of GM's key pony cars, designed to compete with the Ford Mustang and Pontiac Firebird. Sleek styling, long hood, and short rear deck aimed to convey speed and aggression. Available with 6-cylinder engines up to small block V8s, it was marketed as a youthful, performance-oriented car. Interior comfort and sporty touches appealed to a broad demographic, from young professionals to muscle car enthusiasts. But behind the stylish exterior lurked serious structural vulnerabilities. The 1975 Camaro suffered from a poorly reinforced front subframe, which had deadly consequences during collisions. Front subframe, responsible for mounting the engine and suspension, it was under-engineered for high-speed impacts. Weak welds and thin steel allowed the subframe to deform excessively, often separating from the main body in a crash. Engine intrusion. The 305 or 350 small block engine could penetrate the passenger compartment, crushing the driver or front seat passenger. These failures were not hypothetical. Crash reports showed real-world fatalities directly caused by subframe collapse and engine intrusion. Several factors compounded the Camaro's structural hazards. Short wheelbase increased the likelihood of rapid rotation during impact or evasive maneuvers. Rigid passenger cell. Limited energy absorption, meaning forces from collisions were directly transmitted to occupants. Heavy V8 engines. Once the subframe failed, the engine's mass acted as a blunt instrument, driving into the cabin. Drivers often had no chance to survive frontal crashes above 40 to 50 miles per hour, even with basic seatbelts. The combination of under-engineered subframe and powerful engine made the 1975 Camaro a frequent participant in tragic accidents. Subframe failures occurred in high-speed collisions with stationary objects or other vehicles. Engine intrusion caused fatal chest and head injuries. Front suspension collapse sometimes led to secondary impacts, spinning the car into oncoming traffic. Insurance and NHTSA reports from the era documented numerous fatalities and serious injuries, earning the car a grim reputation among safety-conscious drivers. Car, engine, subframe design, crash behavior, and outcome. 1975 Chevrolet Camaro, 305 to 350 V8, weak front subframe, engine intrudes, fatal crush, frequent deaths in high-speed crashes. 1975 Pontiac Firebird, 350 to 400 V8, slightly stronger, front crush, occasional intrusion, fewer deaths than Camaro. 1975 Ford Mustang II, 200 to 302 V8, moderate, front-end collapse in high-speed impact, better survivability. 1975 Dodge Challenger, 318 to 383 V8, heavier chassis, stronger, front crush, less engine intrusion, safer at moderate speeds. Compared to rivals, the Camaro's lightweight, high-power design combined with an underbuilt subframe made it especially lethal. The 1975 Camaro demonstrates how aesthetic and performance priorities can overshadow safety. The car looked fast and aggressive, but couldn't protect its occupants in real crashes. Engineers focused on handling and acceleration while neglecting structural integrity under impact. This imbalance turned a promising muscle car into a death trap at speed, especially for inexperienced drivers seeking thrills. The 1975 Chevrolet Camaro is a stark reminder that muscle car performance without structural safety is a recipe for disaster. Enthusiasts chased speed, but the front subframe's weakness and engine intrusion potential turned routine accidents into fatal events. Style, power, and marketing couldn't compensate for a chassis that failed under stress. The Camaro's legacy is dual: an icon of 1970s American muscle and a cautionary tale in automotive engineering. Number 2. The 1975 Pontiac Ventura was GM's attempt to offer a small, affordable, and stylish compact car in the wake of rising fuel prices and the growing popularity of imports. Marketed as a practical family car, it featured a simple V6 or four-cylinder engine and basic suspension. Positioned below the Tempest and Le Mans, the Ventura was intended to capture economy-minded buyers who wanted Pontiac styling on a budget. Its rushed production schedule and cost-cutting measures, however, created a hidden danger. The Ventura's most infamous flaw was the rear-mounted gas tank. Located directly above and just behind the rear axle, leaving very little clearance in collisions. In moderate to severe rear-end impacts, the gas tank could rupture immediately. Combined with thin rear sheet metal, collisions often punctured the tank and ignited fuel, leading to catastrophic fires. This design choice prioritized cost and compact packaging over occupant safety. The Ventura's rear fuel tank design led to numerous fatal incidents. Insurance reports from the late 1970s documented dozens of fire-related deaths in relatively low-speed rear-end collisions. Occupants had almost no time to escape, especially if the car was full of passengers. These incidents contributed to Pontiac's reputation for unsafe compacts alongside other GM models with rear fuel vulnerabilities. Several critical errors compounded the danger. Cheap materials, thin steel around the tank area offered no protection during impact. Rushed design process, safety testing was minimal before production release. Lack of shielding or barriers. Unlike later models, the Ventura had no fuel tank protection to prevent punctures. Essentially, cost-cutting and speed to market created a car that could ignite on impact, a fatal flaw disguised by attractive styling. Car, fuel tank placement. Rear collision behavior. Outcome. 1975 Pontiac Ventura, directly behind rear axle. Tank rupture, fire, dozens of fatalities. 1975 AMC Gremlin, short rear crumple, tank slightly forward, rear crush, occupant entrapment, multiple injuries, some fatalities. 1975 Chevrolet Nova, conventional placement, tank safer but frame weak, fewer fires. 1975 Ford Pinto, rear tank over axle, explosive in rear-end crashes, hundreds of fatalities. The Ventura's problem mirrored the Pinto. Rear fuel tank over axle was a recipe for disaster. The 1975 Ventura highlights how small design choices can have deadly consequences. Cost and speed to market cannot override basic safety principles. Proper placement of the fuel tank and structural reinforcements are critical in compact cars. Regulators and crash testing eventually forced industry-wide attention to rear fuel tank safety, partly due to cars like the Ventura. The 1975 Pontiac Ventura is a sobering example of mid-1970s automotive compromise. It looked affordable and modern, but hid a hidden threat in its gas tank placement. Rear-end collisions could quickly turn minor accidents into fiery fatalities. For automotive historians and safety engineers, the Ventura remains a case study in how cheap, rushed engineering can cost lives.
Number 1. The 1955 Dodge Royal was marketed as a stylish and spacious family car, with chrome-laden trim and a smooth ride that suggested refinement. Positioned as a mid- to upper-range model in Dodge's lineup. Featured classic 1950s styling, long body, sweeping fenders, and a prominent grille. Buyers assumed comfort and safety came standard, but looks hid critical engineering problems. One of the Royal's most dangerous issues was its steering box. After extended use, the steering box could seize due to poor lubrication and weak materials. Drivers often experienced sudden wheel lockup mid-turn, especially on winding rural roads. At highway speeds, this flaw frequently led to loss of control accidents, with the car plowing off the road or into oncoming traffic. This was a classic case of cosmetic appeal masking dangerous mechanical oversight. Another critical safety flaw involved the fuel tank placement and structure. The Dodge Royal's rear design left the fuel tank vulnerable to impact. During rear-end collisions, the tank could rupture and ignite rapidly. Combined with the already heavy and rigid body, rear collisions often resulted in fatal fires. This flaw was common in mid-1950s American cars, where styling often trumped occupant safety. The combination of steering failure and rear fuel vulnerability made the Dodge Royal exceptionally dangerous. Numerous fatal crashes on winding, rural roads were documented. Survivors often suffered serious burns or blunt force injuries from uncontrolled impacts. The car's luxurious appearance misled drivers into false confidence, increasing the likelihood of high-speed mishaps. Component, issue, consequence. Steering box, seized mid-turn after long drives. Sudden loss of control, spin-outs. Fuel tank, poorly protected rear placement. Fires in rear-end collisions. Suspension and brakes, heavy body, primitive drum brakes. Longer stopping distances, increased crash severity. In short, the Dodge Royal's mechanical and structural weaknesses made it deadly despite its attractive styling. The 1955 Dodge Royal demonstrates the dangers of form over function. Luxury appearance does not equal safety. Regular inspection and maintenance of critical components like steering were essential, yet the design itself was flawed.
Fuel tank protection and crash energy management were largely absent in mid-1950s American cars, a factor that prompted later safety reforms. The 1955 Dodge Royal is a cautionary tale of the 1950s auto industry, beautiful to behold but mechanically unforgiving and hazardous. Steering failures on winding roads, coupled with vulnerable fuel tanks, made it a deadly combination. For historians and safety engineers, the Royal is a reminder that styling and luxury cannot compensate for fundamental engineering safety.